Welcome everyone to the Unity workshop. If you haven't already, I'm gonna just quickly touch on like downloading Unity. Um, Hopefully, everyone that's here today has downloaded Unity, or at least the Unity Hub, so you can follow along. Otherwise, because the install takes a little bit, whatever version of Unity you have should work. Whether you have 2019, 2020, I'm probably gonna use the latest release build right now, just because that's what you're more likely to use. So it was posted in the Discord earlier, but if you don't have it already, go to unity3d.com, get Unity download. You can get the specific Unity download, but I highly recommend you download Unity Hub. When you download this, basically this will install, and you will get this little nifty Unity Hub. And the cool thing about this is it helps manage your projects and your installs. So for instance, when you first download Unity Hub, probably won't have any Unity downloads. From here, you can add and install any Unity release that you like. So if this is your first time, you can just grab the latest official release, 2020.1, hit next. It'll ask you for different support, in which don't worry about most of this stuff. This is to like have it build. Like if you were wanting to do something Mac, maybe if you're on Mac, I recommend getting that. But otherwise, just the default for today is fine. And you can always go back in and add more to the Unity version later. I'm not going to install a new version as I already have it installed, but it will sit here, it'll download, it'll install, and it'll let you know once it's done. And what's cool about Unity Hub is you can have several different versions of Unity. So I have 2020 here for today, but a project I'm working on for Game Lab, we're using 2019.4, and so I can have the exact version that all the teams using together and the same version that's on our UTD computers. Once you have Unity installed, hopefully once got that going at the very least, um, then we can create a new project. And this is where we can sort of this is where we start creating our game. But before I get there, I just want to mention that there are a couple other tabs besides install that I do recommend if you are just now learning Unity. They actually have a couple projects and tutorials just built into the Unity Hub. They have community stuff, but in here in the Learn, there's some projects that you can download, and it's a Unity project you can mess around, play, and like actually like get to see the inner workings of, which is really cool. Starting out, and then there's a couple actually guided tutorials as well. But yeah, so starting a new project, awesome. Um, hit new. And if you have different versions of Unity, you can select which one. So we'll do 2020. From there, you'll be given a couple different options. And really, if you're starting out, I would just worry about the difference between 2D and 3D, depending on what game you're wanting to create. Today, I'm going to be going through some 3D navigations and things like that. And Unity is pretty well known for its 3D capabilities. But it can perfectly fine do 2D games as well. And then these are rendering pipelines that I don't really worry about today, but they help with like graphical different parts of the game. So create that, give it a name, just call this workshop. And then wherever you want to locate it, this is where I store mine. So wherever on your device you want to store it, hit create. And putting our PC shouldn't take too long to initialize. We did the HDRP. This would take a while. It likes HDRP. But just typical 3D. Just give this a second and it'll run. I'm curious. My camera as well. Make it a little more personable, maybe. Hello. All right. Not sure. With 20 people, if Discord will loading. Okay. I haven't really gotten anything yet, but this is loading right now. So does anyone have any questions on like just getting that first bit? started on the install on Unity Hub or anything? All right, awesome.
Are we gonna be
Yes.
making again?
What are we going to be making?
Yes.
So we'll be end goal of today. So there's a lot of things to touch on. Unfortunately, can't say you're gonna have a fully functioning game by the end of today. Eh. But it's ideally we'll have a scene where we will have a object that we can call our player. We can move around, and then have a couple pickups that we can then pick up and add score and make a little sound effect. It's not too much, but by doing this, we'll ideally cover a bunch of different components and parts of Unity, and then sort of give you a starting point to maybe you can take that and build that further later. Okay, so got here. If everyone's following along, I may just give it a couple more seconds just for y'all's to load, because I know it's nice to follow along best you can, but do sort of want to keep going at a pace. All right, so Unity's open. You get this screen. Um, at first, it's pretty simple, but at the same time, if you look around, there's like a lot of different tabs. Get a little confusing, a little overwhelming, but need to worry. We'll get into some as much as we can, and get a little familiar. And as you work in Unity, you'll get used to it, and it'll become a lot easier to work. Um, but very first thing you probably notice is this big center screen here, and this is what we call our scene view. And this is pretty much where you get to work and build your game, like visually you get to see it. Right now there isn't really much. It's literally blank. It's a skybox and a couple components, a camera and a directional light, which I'll talk a little bit more about later. But first thing I want to talk about is this uh, this scene view here. There's a couple ways you can navigate through it. Uh, as you're seeing right now, I'm able to like look around. You just hold the right mouse button and look around and see. Now there isn't really much, I guess you say, things to look at, so it could be navigation's a little interesting right now, an empty scene. But between these 2 points, you can sort of see when we're moving like this. If you're holding the right click, use the WASD to sort of fly around, sort of no clip style. I like to do that to move around different scene and whatnot. If you're doing that and you hold shift, you sort of like speed boost. So it's sort of cool. Additionally, if you can mouse wheel to zoom in and out. And then if you middle mouse click, you do a pan. Alternatively, you can also pan by clicking on the top left up here, and this is the hand tool, and then you just default left click, will pan around. So that's the scene view, and we'll be navigating throughout a little bit more and talk some more with it here to come.
How do you go back to the center? Like, is there a... Because I zoomed way too out and to the left, and I don't know
Ah,
how to get back.
yeah. So if I ended up like all the way over here, I'm all the way over here. Like where's my objects? I don't know how I got here. Um, that's where you can, if you have an object in your scene. So we have this directional light. If you double click on it, it will select it and center on the object, and that should give you a good point of reference. You can also, if you click on it and if you press, I believe, I thought it was F. Someone can correct me here what the focus button is, but if you double click on it, you'll focus. That should help. Down here is our projects tab and the assets folder. And this is pretty much sort of think of like Windows Explorer, File Explorer. It's this, but in Unity. And it holds all your assets, your models, your scripts, and everything is in here. in which I mean straight up it is show an explorer, and it's a file, it's just a file structure as a part of Unity. And with it, you can we could create, like, say, let's create a folder for our scripts, for instance. And then all of our code that we write, we can put our scripts in here. And of course, you can have subfolders, and you can see them appear here. We can call this one like player scripts. Oh, oops, I did not mean to create a script, but we'll get to that. Scripts. And then you can sort of see the folder structure here. And that's where we'll hold a lot of our assets, prefabs, and stuff like that. Okay. And on the left over here, we have our hierarchy. Oh,
Yeah.
yes. Does someone have a question?
I believe someone has their mic on by accident.
Okay, great. Okay, on the left here, we have our hierarchy view, which pretty much it has all the objects in your scene. But first, what is a scene? I've talked about the scene view, a hierarchy, which is a scene. And you probably see this folder here that's scenes. Well, a scene, you sort of think about it, simple terms, think of it as a level. So a Unity scene could be like level 1, and then another Unity scene could be level 2. And each one of these scenes holds your Unity assets and your workspace, and they can connect together, so you could have level 1 go to level 2, and you could have a scene for your main menu, a scene for cutscenes, so on and so forth. So, for instance, it starts off with a sample scene, but we could create a new scene if we wanted to. There we go. Create a new scene, and I'll just call this one, just call it a workshop scene. And then if I double click on it, if you notice here in the hierarchy, it will change name, and now I'm working in it. It's a little hard to tell the difference between these two because they are identical and have practically nothing in it. But if this one had level 2 and this one had level 1, then what we see here in the scene view would change drastically and it would become level 1 to level 2 or vice versa. If you're following along, you can create your own scene like I just did, or you could use a sample scene. Doesn't really matter. And then in hierarchy is where we can sort of see the different objects.
Are there
yes, go ahead.
Are there like games that are like popular games which are produced with only one scene?
It's a good question. It's hard to say, but like other like Unity scenes. So I'm sure it's definitely viable, or at the very least, some may have very few. For instance, they may have like their main menu and then their game. And maybe it's something like that.
I see.
Yeah. Ellie has here in the chat, and for our game lab game, we pretty much are gonna have, we got our main menu, and then we have one scene that's gonna run everything else. And that's because we're doing a roguelike and it's procedurally generating things. It's just sort of how we have things set up. I do recommend splitting things into scenes if you can, like if you have different levels, sections, and stuff like that, as it helps organize and helps load and deload things. But we have like a special setup, so you can have it in one scene, like everything if you wanted to. But it's good to break things apart to a degree and help by deloading certain things and stuff like that.
And can you like layer scenes on top of each other, like have two scenes? I don't know how you say it, but you know how like one scene's like the background, one scene's like the foreground, something like that, or no?
Yes, so there are methods of doing like level streaming and stuff like that. I'm not going to touch on any of that today, But like for instance, let's say I had like an open world game. They may they could split things up into like game objects and prefabs, but they may also split, let's say, sections of the map or different scenes, and then they can have it load in a. You can have several scenes loaded in at the same time, and then use that to like seamlessly load between scenes and stuff like that. So there are ways to having several scenes loaded at the same time. Um, Unfortunately, I'm not going to look at that, but if you want to discuss that further, I'd be happy to look into that and provide resources. But for the most part, especially if you're starting, having things individually is pretty good. Yeah. So back to our hierarchy. So Unity has a lot of different, several different objects you can just sort of create off the bat, including several different primitive shapes and stuff. So if you want, you can create a cube, the primitive 3D cube, and it just throws it into the hierarchy and into our scene. Just like that, have a cube. Woo! And then just to reiterate a point I was talking about earlier, you can swap between scenes and see that they're different. If you see right here, that means that this scene is unsaved. I could just Control S, it saves the scene. And then now I can swap between. I can go back to sample scene, it's not there. I go back to workshop scene, there's our cube. And you can see that they are held in different places. Cool. So we created this cube here. But how do I like move it around the scene and whatnot? Well, by default, when you create it, it is selected, and you can sort of see it selected here. It's highlighted with this green outline, which is something we'll talk about later, but also has these arrows right here. And if for some reason it's not highlighted, you click somewhere else, you can highlight it again by either clicking on it on the hierarchy or clicking on it in the scene view. And then from there, and like I said earlier, if like you don't know where it is, just double click on it, and then it becomes center. From there, you can move it around your scene using these arrows. This moves it along the different axes. Axes, yeah. And you can just sort of move it up and down, left, right. You can also, if we look at the top left, we have couple different tools. If I click here, this is our rotate tool, and this becomes a different shape. And now I can rotate it along different axes. And then we also have our scale tool. And this helps like this scales. So if I wanted to move it this way, I can make it long, short, anywhere. And then this little center box here and just expands everything proportionally. Alternatively, and to sort of get into this right window over here, this is our inspector. When you click on an object like this cube or directional light, you can see that on the right it changes. We have our name up here, and then we have different components to it, which I'll talk about here. But with the cube, this first thing here is our transform. And this is where in the world it is located, its rotation, and its scale. All the things that we were just messing with these tools up here. Just these first three in the middle. These ones right here are for UI, which we will touch on probably briefly a bit later. But between these three, we'll edit these values. You can also swap between them by pressing, if you press W, you go to the arrows. If you press E, it goes to the rotation. If you press R, it goes to the scaling. I'll go back to W. Let's say I don't want it actually rotated anymore. I can come over here and I can set my rotation back to 0, 0, 0. There, and now I have a box that is rotated properly. I don't like it scaling either. I want that to go back. Now I could set that also back to 0. But I could also click right here and I can hit reset. And that just resets it back to 1, 1, 1 for the scale. And then its position goes to 0, 0. And this is the very center of our scene. 0, 0, 0. In which is typically good practice when you create an object. I'll just create another sphere. it ends up sort of just created wherever your sort of scene view is. It's a lot of time good practice just to reset it to 0 and then take it from there. Just so you don't lose things and stuff like that. Now, of course, you can have objects in each other. Unity will let you do that, but we'll just sort of separate those two. Two different primitive objects. So going back to here to the inspector, before I go into these others, I want to mention here at the top, you can rename your objects. So we have this as a cube. Good, I don't know, but box instead. Boxes are superior to cubes. Go with that. And then if you notice, it changes here on the left as well. This is also good because let's just say I'm using several different cubes. They do different things. Well, now I have cube and cube 1. Which is which? Well, let's say this I was going to use as a wall and this I was going to use as a floor. I could probably call it appropriately wall and floor. Otherwise, you're going to get yourself confused. If you're working with others, you're going to get them confused. So name your objects well, and probably have a standardized upper and lower case. Oh well. If you don't want an object, you can delete it. Click on it in the scene, click it on the left, press delete, boom, it's gone. Or you can right click on it, the delete. Alternatively, you can also duplicate items by right click duplicate. Now I have 2 boxes. Or if you press Control D, it duplicates as well. Which can be a little weird. I know Control D can be delete in other programs, but it's duplicate in this. That also works here in the file folder. If you do Control D, it will like copy, say, a scene. I could copy a scene and have a variation on a scene. And same as up here, I can delete things here. It will typically warn me on like bigger assets and stuff like that, but I will delete sample scene 1, which I just duplicated.
Andrew, could I mention one thing about duplication?
Yeah, absolutely.
So I just wanted to mention that when you duplicate an object, it matches the like scale and rotation and position of everything. So it like if you hit Control D, sometimes you have to like double check that it worked because the objects are like perfectly overlapping each other. So it might be like hard to tell.
There are 2 different objects right here, so you do have to like pop it out and move. Yeah, that's a good point. Thanks for bringing that up. Anyways, I'm gonna get rid of these boxes. And you can like if you hold Control, you can select different things, several different things, or if you hold Shift, it'll select everything from here to there. Okay. So I'll just delete these extra boxes. Does anyone have any questions so far on like creating objects, sort of navigating the scene a bit? Check. I'm having my check. Like I said, we will upload this later, ideally, and if you ever have any questions after the fact, you can always let me know. Okay, so on the right here, we talked a bit about the name. I'm not gonna tags and layers. I won't get into too much today. I may touch briefly on it, but those are good for like categorizing things. So if I had a player, we can hit player. Transform is what I talked about, is where we could set our different positions. So I can change this to 1, and it moves forward 1 on the x-axis. Alternatively, and you can do this with like nearly any like numeric editor inspector value. If you like where you see this x, if you click, you move right, it will adjust up, and if you go left, it'll adjust back negatively. Anyways, so that can be cool if you want to just sort of like want to see it like mess with values and see it like move around like that. program similar to Maya. You see, I could do with a crash course into Maya, so I can't really say. But just if you, I've like touched very little of like, but like sort of your like navigation of the scene and whatnot is gonna be similar, but there's a lot of big differences.
Wait.
There's some certain things that would feel similar. Yeah, someone else can sort of, yeah, the 3D space, yeah.
Yeah, because the Q, W, E, and R shortcuts are the same thing, and then the
Oh, cool.
navigation's the same. So
Okay, yeah. So it's sort of a standardized, I guess, working in a 3D space. So yeah, it's that's cool that they're actually similar. So on objects we have different components, and components sort of affect and tell an object, a game object. So we have this is a game object, which is our box. This box has different components. It has a transform. Every game object has a transform. Of course, 3 different vector 3s of where it's at, its rotation, and its scale. But also, this one in particular has a mesh, and it has a cube mesh. You could change that mesh to be like a capsule, and then it will render as a capsule. And with that is our mesh renderer, and this is what enables this particular object to render in our scene and in our game. Most components you could turn on and off. So if I turn off this mesh renderer, then we can no longer see the object. Turn that back on, and I'll turn this back to cube. Actually, this is a good time to say, guess what? You can Control Z, and you can Control Z a lot of things, and undo, and it is your best friend. You can Control Y as well to redo. You can undo practically any. If you mess with a lot of things in the inspector and you realize, oh shoot, I shouldn't have done that, or I don't like that, you can just Control Z back to a state where you like it. Also, like if you save things, then go back to that. But yeah, so got back to the box just by undoing. And I'm not going to get into like light probes and reflection probes because I don't really know what all that does. But basically, mesh renderer is what helps render your objects. And someone smarter than me can probably tell you some of these other stuff. And then we have a collider, which is this green outline. And so when I turn this mesh renderer off, you still see this green outline. That is this object right here. And this is one of our first components, which helps this particular object, the box, interact with other things in the world. With a collider, it basically, well, it tells other things to collide with it, and vice versa. And I'm gonna actually use this box collider a bit later when we talk, when I show like our pickups and stuff like that. But yeah, so pretty much with this collider, you can sort of think of it as I'm making it physical. It is physically in the world. And you could actually have this collider a different size and different position than your actual like transform in the what it shows it as a mesh. So for instance, I could edit this collider using the same thing as I did on the transform scale, and I could adjust its size, maybe make it 2. I could also edit it by if I click this little button here on Edit Collider. Now there's like these little squares, and I can click it, move it up and down, and adjust the collider. And so yeah, you can have it different sizes because maybe you have a complex shape, but all you really need is like a box to have it work in your game. If you could think of it, if you ever play like fighting games, like hitboxes and stuff like that, and how those are typically slightly different than like the character model and stuff like that. And well, that's what this box collider is, and so we can make it maybe a little bit smaller and stuff like that. So it ultimately up to you. I'm gonna reset that back to having it be normal. Okay. Cool. And finally, we have this material down here, which is sort of like a component, but anything like like this actually has a material. And this is where Cameron and Andrew Von Harris could probably talk a lot more about than I. But I can at least tell you a little bit basic. So this is it has a default material, which is this sort of gray on it. But if we wanted to, we can go to our asset. We can right click down here. We could create a new material. It's here in the middle here. Audio mixer. We create that. We'll call this box material. And when we have this material, we then can come over here, edit different values, and for instance, I could change the color. Make it, I don't know, green. And then I can grab it here in the assets, drag it into the scene, directly onto our object. You notice, now it's green. And over here, it has the box material. Alternatively, I can undo that and I can come here and I could, nope, I know there's another way. Like I said, select shader? Nope, nope. Messing with things like, yeah, just drag it over here and ask Cameron how to do other ways. He'll know how.
Oh, I don't even do it any other way. I always drag it into this.
I thought there was another way, but maybe I'm mistaken. Maybe I'm just confused. Yeah, I mean, it's simple enough to go like that anyways, so. Boom. Yeah, now how's the color? Yay. And yeah, so these are like some just default ones here, and we'll go into a couple more because you can add all sorts of different components. See this add component button, and there's all sorts of different categories. Add AR capability. There's meshes, miscellaneous, physics, and stuff like that. All sorts of different built-in Unity things that there's way too many, and things that I don't even know how they work quite yet for me to go over today. And so feel free, mess around with those and whatnot. Alternatively, also when you create a script, which we'll do here soon enough, it becomes a component on this object as well. Okay. Any questions so far on like the inspector and these components?
Is there a floor on this sort of work scene that's already there?
Not.
No.
And which actually I'm going to get to here, and you'll see that that we'll have to create our own scene. Right now, it's just an endless void. But you can sort of see here this. There's a grid. This is sort of help you just like navigation and scale and sizes, and so there is sort of a grid at like this is at y is equal to 0, and it goes along the xz plane. There are ways to like use that grid. But yeah, so no, there is not. Right now, it is just an endless drop. Actually, lead into this next point. Let's add a component. And if you're following along, I'm going to go into physics. And then in there, there's this thing called a rigid body. Alternatively, you could just look these things up. You click on, yet again, add component. You can type in rigid. It'll show up right there. And you can click on it or press enter. Added a rigid body. Rigid body basically adds physics to this object. Tells it to use Unity physics, and we can adjust different values, mass, use gravity, and how it should detect collisions and certain constraints and things like that. But by doing this, we now have an object that will move physically and interact with the world. Now actually seeing this in action. If there's another window here called our game view, if I click on that, you see this little this static view over here. Now, if you notice, look at this view here. Go back to the scene. We have our camera, and that's where our game view is. This is when we run our game. This is the window that we're going to be using. So we just added a rigid body on this thing, and it should interact with the world. I'm going to move this a little. And on top here, I'll notice that there's like a pause button. I'm going to hit play. If I hit play, it will automatically swap to the game view after, I don't know what happened there, but okay. I'll automatically swap to the game view. We'll play. And if you caught it there, our box was there, and it fell. And now it's probably just falling endlessly into the void. But it moves. We have something moving in our scene, in our game. Woo! And that's because we added this rigid body. We're telling it, hey, use physics and use gravity. So it fell. We can hit play, and I could pause it really quick. When you pause it, it automatically comes back to the scene view. You can sort of see that it fell. You can see that it fell a little more than 2 units below in that a little bit of time. Go back to the game and see it fell a little bit from this horizon here. You can alternately also go frame by frame, and you can see it fall just every frame, step by step. And I can unpause it. There it goes. While the game's running, you can also still be in your scene view. You can see it falling endlessly into the void down there. So, as mentioned, let's probably add a floor to our scene so we can actually do stuff. You could use another box and just flatten it out. Alternatively, there's in 3D objects, the plane. And this is by default typically used for like floors stuff. So I'm going to reset it back to 0, 0, 0. I'm going to have this set right here. Our box will move above 0. We'll have it up a bit. And with our sphere, which is doing really nothing. And now, you notice, this plane has a mesh collider, and this box has a box collider. Because of that, when I hit play, it falls. And with the rigid body and both of them having colliders, they'll fall and stop. So cool. A little simple interaction in our scene. Yeah.
Whenever I did it with one of the capsule thingies. But
yeah,
I suppose that with the rounded end, it would just fall over to the side, but it didn't. Is it because it's like a perfect thing? I guess. If
good question. When you had the capsule, did you create a capsule from here, or did you do what I did earlier and change the mesh
from the cube?
So yes. Is it like this?
Yes.
Okay. So actually, this is actually a very good point. So I set this to a capsule here, but if you notice, we still have a box collider, and this is our collision. So if I hit play, it'll fall, and it fell like that. We go back into our scene. If you notice, the collider, because this is what actually physically interacts with other things, is it hit the plane, and it's sitting on the plane. This capsule is just a rendering mesh. It doesn't actually physically interact with the world. It's this box collider itself. So if I wanted it to have a capsule shape in its collision, then what I'll need to do is we can replace that. In which what we'll do is we'll get rid of this box collider. I'm going to say remove component. And then you can add a different collider. And it has a couple different type of colliders. There's a box collider. There's colliders for 2D, which since we're in a 3D world, don't need to worry about that. But we could do there is a capsule collider in here. You can see that the green lines now match up with this capsule here. If I hit play, get a different result. Now it still fell straight, and that's probably because it's like perfectly balanced, as all things should be. But I rotated it maybe a little bit. There it goes. Yeah.
See, so if you rotated it, just updates in real time again.
Yeah, And that's actually another good point. When you hit play, you can edit things while it's still playing. In the scene, you can actually like pick things up and it'll still keep running. It may be easier to pause, move things, and then unpause and then have things play. But yeah, I can rotate it and then it'll fall over. I could reset its position. I could set this back to 0 here, and it pushes itself back up. But an important thing to note is if you're making edits while in play mode. So let's say I made all these changes and I scaled this to like 5. It's big, it's weird, and I made it not use gravity, and I changed. Oh yeah, and it's a cylinder now. Okay, I messed with it. Oh, watch this. Back to where it was before. So any edits you make in the play mode do not carry over for the most part. So you can make edits and stuff and not worry about ruining what you have saved, and so it can be good for like trying out different things and seeing what works well. But you do want to make sure you know whether or not you're in play mode or not. As I've had plenty of times where I thought I was like changing values over here on the inspector. I was like, I got exactly where on it. This feels good. And I realized I'm in play mode and I unplay and I lost all my progress. Dang it. So you want to make sure if you notice it will show it here, but also it gets a little darker around the scene itself. There is some settings. I'm not exactly look into it here. Maybe at the end there you can actually change where if you hit play mode, maybe your outside Unity color becomes red, and so you know you're in play mode if that like is an issue for you. Also, just as a little tidbit, if you were making changes in play mode, let's say changed some stuff on this rigid body, and I've changed this mass to 5. And I wanted to keep that, but I'm in play mode, and I know that. I can click on these dots here, and I can say copy component. And it copies this specific rigid body component. And I'll hit on play, and come back here. And then I click on this again, and there's paste component values. This will then paste everything that I had on that in play mode on here. And if you notice, now it's at 5. This is also good if, say, you had a couple of different objects and you wanted to copy this rigid body over to the sphere here and have the exact same properties of it. I could copy that rigid body over to the sphere using that. And since I still have a copy, I could actually paste component as new, as it does not have a rigid body. And now I have a rigid body. Hit play. There goes the sphere.
Yeah. So you can like put like a rigid body of like, how do I say this? Have a cube with have a sphere as the collider, but have the cube as the rendered part, and have like rolling cubes or something.
Yeah. Actually, something I saw. It was a cool implementation of like it was like a little Unity like over the top racing game, and for their cars, it's like more more cube like cars and stuff like that. But they just had in the background invisibly, it was just a sphere collider just rotating, and it provided actually a cool like they were able to like drift and like turn in cool ways because it was just a rolling ball with a car rendered over it. So there's different cool ways and things set up with that. But yeah. All right. Let's see. Any other questions so far? Something I do want to note, I meant to actually bring this up earlier, is you have all these windows, right? And if you don't really like how it is, like let's say I wanted this a little more, you can change your workspace if you wanted to. You can always just move around boxes. You could pick up and like actually physically move windows. You could have it popped out. So I could bring it onto my other screen. Of course, you can't see my other monitor, but I could bring it out to the other monitor. I could the back, I could have it split here so that I could see both my scene view and my game view at the same time, and I can hit play. And now I see it here on the right, and then I can also still do things and still see it in my scene view. And yeah, and you can really personalize it however you want. You can be a mad lad and do something like this, and I don't know why you would, but hey, power to you. But say you screwed it up and whatnot, you can come up here to the top right, and you can just always reset it to the default. There's also a couple other like standard ones, like for split, I see different angles and by 3, stuff like that. Well, we'll just go back to default. Okay. I do want to touch on briefly, if you notice here in the play, this is based off of this camera. So this camera here is our main camera. And I won't get too much into cameras because there's a lot of complex stuff you can do with cameras. You could have 5 cameras in the scene, turn them on and off, have cinematic camera. I highly recommend if you're doing like camera work. Unity has a free asset pack called Cinemachine, and that provides a lot of capabilities. But if you're just learning Unity, just start with a simple main camera for now, and sort of mess with that. But since I'm bringing that on, that's a good segue. There is an asset store. It has moved in 2020. There's an asset store that's apparently not part of the Unity editor anymore, and hell, I have not used 2020 much at all. My apologies. But it looks like it's actually moved online, and they're sort of using this package manager to import things. So Unity has things set up where you could find like free asset packs, and there's a lot of them that are made by Unity themselves. So you could get this Cinemachine I was mentioning, get it from the asset store, import it through the packages, and then you would have it here in your assets, and then you could use it in your game. And if it's on the asset store, it's either for free or there's a lot of paid ones, and as long as you pay for it, you're welcome to use it in your game. So that could be cool, especially if you're doing like a game jam and you need like, or if you're just messing around with prototypes and whatnot, maybe you want some basic models to your programmer and you just want some models and maybe some animations for some stuff. You could find that in the asset store. All right, camera here. So I can move it, and it actually shows you here on the main camera, which is what our game view is, and I can move it up, and then down. You can see it changes in the game view. I'll tilt it maybe a little bit down a little bit so you could sort of looks down at our game like that. And then all sorts of different values. You can change the field of view. You could go really zoomed in. I don't know why. You could go quick style, go a little bit more out, all the way out. But just do the default for now. Disco camera does like a weird like zoom in thing, very stylized, I guess. And then you can change the clipping planes. So the if you notice as I adjust this near clipping plane, this part here is changing. This is like anything that's inside of this like shape here is rendered on screen. So if I adjust this in such a way, you notice that it just stops rendering part of the scene. And reset this back to default. You can adjust the far planes as well if you don't need to be rendering things so far. Like truthfully, like for our scene, I could probably bring this down to 100 and beat that. That'll be good. That's even still more than enough. But yeah. And then other different graphics settings. And then we also, in our scene, these are the 2 things that were by default in the default scene. We also have our directional light. And there's several different type of lights, but directional light. So this one, it looks like the sun. It's matched up with the the Unity sun for the most part in the skybox. And you notice, since it's over here, angled that way, we have a shadow coming off of it over here. So pretty cool. By default, we already have like shadows rendering. There's all sorts of cool things. You can mess with lighting and stuff like that. Yet again, that's some cool wizardry stuff, messing with some of that I've seen. Yet again, Cameron, Andrew messing with. I know Hope. I don't know if she's in there. Has done. So there's a lot of really cool stuff you can do with it. But at the very least, here in the lighting, you can adjust. Let's say I could adjust this to go straight down, and now I have my shadows right there, and I can go that way, and now the shadow's on that side. I'll just keep it back over here. I can change this color, make it more. I could say there's like a cool like blue lighting. It's hard to tell with just like 3 objects in the scene. Now just everything looks blue, but like if there was like an entire terrain, it would look a little more. And if you had some fog, which you can add, it would adjust stuff like that. We'll just keep it default. You can also change how intense things are. Make it really, really blinding and just horrible, but mess with things, mess with shadows and stuff like that. Cool. Check my notes. You're at 8:06. Okay. Does anyone have any more questions about like some of the Unity navigation stuff, components, anything I've touched on so far? And there's a lot here, and I'm sure there are certain little things I've missed. And there's a lot to it. And again, this is going quick, crash course. So as you use it, you'll learn more. But no. Any questions?
For the light,
Yeah.
you pointed it away from the frame, from the plane the first time, but there was still shadow.
Yeah, so a directional light like this is
It doesn't come from
weird.
the light bulb, but from everywhere, I guess.
Yeah, someone else could maybe be able to answer this one a little bit better, but this type of light is like this one specifically, they're global.
Yeah, it's like emulating, like, it doesn't matter where you put it, but it's like
Yeah.
the whole sky is your light bulb, if you imagine
Right.
it kind of like that. So like it's pointing to
Exactly.
like maybe where the sun would be in relative to like where you're working, kind of.
So I could literally have it underneath this plane here, and it would still, because it's just based off. And actually, what's cool, Unity moves its little sun to match with the default skybox.
So like, was it if you're programming like some sort of bootleg Minecraft or whatever?
Sure.
You can have like just an image of a sun that's just moving there, but have the light bulb where the player is at or something, just to have it very accessible.
Yeah. I mean, you could have this way out of the way, maybe somewhere, and then edit it, and this particular light changes globally like that.
Yeah.
Now,
the way I understand it is that the light itself is kind of infinitely far away, so it's actually casting light on everything, and that's why it's global. It's basically as far away as our sun would be in real life. So actually, Andrew, that might be a good point if you wanted to like drag in a couple different types of lights, like a point light or a spotlight, and like show the difference.
What I was literally about to do.
Yeah.
Heck yeah. All right. Yeah. So same place that we sort of create the like 3D objects. There's like lights, and so we could create a spotlight or point light. So this is a point light. And Cameron, feel free to speak up while I talk about lights here.
A point light here is emitting light from a specific point in space. And so it's kind of hard to see, but there's like a large sphere around everything, which kind of shows like the limits of how far the light goes.
Turn that off, and then you could sort of like, I don't know. You see here that there's like light emitting off of it, and you can adjust like a little more intense, and
the center you cannot see, like the light itself, but whenever you can see it when it's bouncing on objects or something.
Right, correct. So it's not going to be like there's not like an actual like light bulb here. But wherever it reflects off of certain objects, and so That's where you would probably want to create like a, say, a light bulb object, and then have this point light on it, and then have it emit from there. And so yeah, you have a point light and do a spotlight, and that the spotlight's probably more of what you were thinking about with the other one. And you can see it has that cone, and where it's hitting, there's this little like it intensity a little bit, but you can see as it hits, it highlights that area. And each one of these could have their own color. So this one red, spotlight, have it like scanning a dark scene and stuff like that, right? And then put it over top of our player. See, and then these will do their thing. So that's with lights. Lights are cool. There's a lot you can do with it that I'm not going to cover today, that I still need to and want to learn more about. Seen some really cool. There's a lot of cool different things, so especially once you go into like the rendering pipelines and stuff like that. But for now, I will turn back on our sun. And you know what? This is a good opportunity to talk about empty game objects. So, you can create in Unity scene, create empty, and let's just create something called a game object. It's called game object. And it has nothing but a transform, because the game object has to have a transform, and it could have nothing else. And so it's literally just a point in space. Well, why would I want this, you may ask? Well, there's a couple reasons. One, this could be maybe our base or something, and I'm adding components. I could build it from the ground up, because I could literally add a box collider and the mesh, and actually, yeah, you could build things from scratch and stuff like that. Currently, empty game objects are really cool, acting as basically parents and folders. So I'm going to rename this one and call it lights. So I have this empty game object called. Then I could take point light, spotlight. I will put it inside of lights, just like that. It's sort of just like a file folders. And now I can clean up my scene and just hide those away by doing that. And still in the scene, but they're now underneath this parent object lights. You can organize it, and you can go deep. You can go however deep you want. I could child this spotlight as a child of point light, which is a child of lights. Which all becomes important in one organization, of course, but also when you start scripting certain things, you can use the use lights and then get all the components in its children and set up certain objects that way. Yeah, and I might as well briefly talk about this. You have an object. Let's actually take our box here, which is now a capsule. I'm going to rename this player. We're going to actually use this as our player. But we have this player here. And let's say I wanted to have it in another scene. The sample scene. Because if I save this scene and go to the sample scene, well, it has nothing in it. Go back to workshop. One, I could just grab player and I could hit Control C. I could go to sample scene and I could hit Control V, and there it is. It's actually really cool because you can be in a different scene, copy it, paste it, and pastes it exactly as is in the exact same position it was in the world as the other scene, which is cool. But let's say I wanted to have it in different scenes, and if I made changes, I wanted to affect in different places. I'm just sort of bringing this up to show you that's a thing. I won't go too much into it, but I can then take this player, drag it into the assets, and I create this thing called a prefab. See down here, it's a player.prefab. And a prefab is basically, it contains this game. So this prefab contains the player. I can now go to sample scene, go into here, grab this player, and put it in there. And what's interesting is both the player in the sample scene and in the workshop scene refer to the same player prefab. and I can edit this prefab directly, which actually brings me to this like special like interdimensional scene. I don't know, but it's just what's in this prefab, which is the player. And then I could actually edit this prefab, and we'll change its mass back to 1. And that saves. And we hit this back arrow and we go back to our scene. If you look at sample scene, its mass is back at 1. If I go to workshop scene, go to my player, its mass is also back up. So it's really cool at hooking up. So yeah, for this instance, like a player to different scenes and like only have to make changes in one spot. And it's also can be used for other different things like instantiating things into the scene from a set prefab. You can now nest prefabs. I'd say now, it's been a couple years since you did that, but prefabs are really cool. I won't go too much into them today, but I just want to show you that's a capability and use them. They're useful. They're really dope. Yeah. Let's add maybe some like functionalities. This blinding light, I don't really like. I'm going to just delete them. I hope that's okay. All right. So we got our player, right? And let's have it actually do something. Let's create a script for it. I have a scripts folder. I have a player scripts folder as well. Create C# script. We'll just call it player today. And now we have a script. Alternatively, and then, well, let me back that up. Once you have it here, then you can click and drag it onto the object you want it to and put it on the player. So now anything in the script will affect this player object. But yeah, alternatively, I could come in here and I could add component, and I could do new script and create a script from here, and it'll create it, add it to this object, and add it in the assets. All right, so now I have this script. Now I can double click it, and by default, it uses Visual Studio. And I believe someone can correct me if I'm wrong. Install Unity, it should automatically come with it. Visual Studio. If you're on like Mac, I think there's different. You can also set it up to work with other IDEs. But Visual Studio is pretty good. Alternatively, Visual Studio Code is also pretty good. So if this is your first time opening up Visual Studio, I believe when you double click this, open up, it may have a prompt. It may ask you to sign in. I'm not for sure. With like a Microsoft account, I believe you can just skip that, or you can even sign in with your UTD one if you want. And then it'll like ask you how do you want to set it up, and it'll ask you like your theme, and you click dark theme. It's the only answer. And then should be able to work from there. And if anyone's having any issues with that and wants some help, I sadly already have it set up here, so I can't really show it. But let me know, and anyone else know. We're happy to work that, help out with that. But yeah, you open up, get here. So I'll talk about a couple different components and things about that are specific to Unity, like scripting for the most part. Maybe you're here and you've never coded before. That's okay. I'm not gonna like teach you like for the most part C# or anything today. Like, don't worry if you don't know what a public class player and like some of that is today. But I just want to show off some like basic functionality and how it's set up. So if you do actually know a little bit of code, how it works in Unity. And actually, I think this is before I dive in, I do want to bring up, if you're coding in Unity, Unity is awesome and has an awesome just Unity API. Scripting reference, docs.unity3d script. And it is well documented. It has all these different, go through Unity Engine, all these different components, how they work in code, how they work in editor, like all those components. Like I was talking about rigid body earlier, right? I could look up rigid search. There we go. It'll bring up like different things, and like I click on rigid body itself, and this is talking about the actual component rigid body in a scripting sense, and it's a class and it has all different public methods and stuff like that. Again, if you're not a coder, don't worry, no stress. But like my coders out there, this is a really awesome resource, really awesome. So let's say I wanted to know what this add force does. It gives a little description. I click on it, add force. As a description, it has a really nice example of how you put it in code and describes it, different parameters, different versions of it. So good, really good. I love it. But yeah, so highly recommend if you're just messing around and need to like know how to use certain parts. Highly recommend Scripting API. All right, so very first thing, when you create a empty C# script by default, it creates it here. It's going to import a couple different files. These are basic like Unity. It needs to have like Unity engine. And then it creates your class, which is what you called your file player. It's always, for the most part, going to be derived as mono behavior. Starting off, no need to really mess with any of this today. But I do want to talk about what is start and what is update. And I mean, it says right here in the comment, both of these occur. So start occurs when I start the game. So for instance, when I hit start here, anything in here will run. And specifically start will occur when, like, let's say I went from sample scene to workshop scene. Start will occur when I load in, when that object gets loaded in to the scene, and that scene gets loaded. There's start, and then there's update. Update happens every frame. So this is constantly checking. You got to think, most games nowadays run at least 60 frames per second. Now are upwards 100s, like mine at 120. And so every frame is going to do anything that's in here. And there are other of these start and update. And again, if you're a code nerd like guy, want to like look into that, there's in the API, I'll have to find it. There's like a cool like a diagram of when things execute, which is good to know. Like every frame, there's like 10 different things that execute at least at different points in a section of a frame that occurs. And I'll see if I can find that maybe a bit later. But let's add something. Let's have something. This is our player, and we're going to want it to move if it's our player. But at the very first, and I mentioned before, it has a transform. Well, by default, you can actually change that transform. So I can directly call that transform on this game object and then do different things. Unity has a nifty just function transform.translate that will just like that is meant to move an object. And so I'm going to grab this transform.translate, and it'll tell you sort of like what it needs. What it's going to need here is it's going to need a vector 3. Again, I'm starting to get to a point where I'm saying some technical terms, and some of y'all who maybe are like never really touched code are like, what is he doing? I'm sorry. I'm just hopefully try to pick up on what you can. And if you have questions, again, come back to it later. Let me know. But for those who maybe do understand some code, I want to show like some of the like Unity like functionality and whatnot. And if you just sort of replicate it, you should be able to follow along, and then hopefully start to like process and break down what actually is happening in this code. And so what I'm going to do is I need to provide. I'm telling it to translate, to move basically, and I want to give a direction. And there's this other like nifty little, so you could call it, it's a class, but it's a sort of a data structure, vector3, and it's basically it's an XYZ. It's a three-dimensional array, or yeah. So I'm gonna say vector3 dot, and we're just gonna say forward, and this is just going to move it forward. And if you're curious, a vector3 dot forward is if I was telling it to the input 0, 0, 1, but for just like this line, just to show this, I'm gonna do vector3 dot. I'm also, importantly, going to remove this rigid body. I don't really want that on right now. Okay, so when I make this change, yet again it has the little stars, and it's not saved. Just Control S, and it saves, and it auto compiles. I can go back here to Unity, and as long as my scripts are saved, I hit play. You probably noticed it just zoomed. Let me see if I can edit this a little bit more. Show that. Oh. And it's gone. So I told it to go forward, and it went forward, and it just went. Gone. So let's we want the ability to adjust its speed, probably. Two, as a heads up, typically if you're moving things, especially in like translate, what you want to do, again, you may not fully understand what is going on here, but in this situation, you want to use time.delta time. And this is, delta time is the like time in seconds since the last frame, and it should help smooth things out. But also it will notice move at a lot more reasonable speed, because it's like multiplying it by like point something 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 every frame that it calculates every frame. Cool math stuff. And now it's moving forward ever so slowly. But let's maybe have this. Well, if we wanted to move it a little quicker with this math, we could tell it, hey, let's multiply it by 5. Let's go 5 times the speed. We can do that. Cool. Hey, it's going a little quicker. Those of you, computer science, coded before, probably like, don't do that. That's hard coding. Yeah, cool. So let's create a variable. Let's do something so we can actually change that. And so in here, I could create a variable. I could type, and I'm just gonna create a private float, and we'll call it speed. Set it to 5. I'll explain this for those who can know. Private, I'm hiding it. It's don't really worry. I'll talk a bit more about private here. Float is, think of it as it's a number that can be a decimal. It's a decimal number, so I could actually set this to like 5.5. 5.5 F is the format for float, and so float is a decimal number, and speed is our name of our variable. And so I can then replace this 5 with speed, and then it grabs this 5.5, uses it as our speed here. I go in here, play, and it's moving at speed. But Andrew, that's nice to have it in here, and well, I can change it here, and if I had speed in several other spots, cool, that changes there. But I have to go into code every time. Ah, there's another way. If I change this to public, if I had it private, and private pretty much hides that variable from other classes and things like that. It's a way to just help secure and help make sure other classes scripts don't mess with your variables. But I can make it public, opening it up to other. And when I make it public, I click on player. Down here on the right, under our player script, we now see that speed variable. And probably guess it, if I speed this up, that's quicker. And I can even change this in the middle of play, like I mentioned before. Or I could go at a negative speed and have it come back. Pretty cool. Alternatively, and I recommend, you could also say Serialize Field and let it fill in for you. This thing, doing this is like specific to Unity. Basically, I'm creating a private variable, and so other classes don't have access to it, and it's good coding practices. But I can still edit it in Unity and it have it open to the editor. And so most of my variables, if there are, I put Serialize Field in front of it as I feel that's probably most appropriate. Oh, cool. We have it moving. Yay. But what if we wanted to control it? Because that would be cool. So let's get some input, and I'll show you. There are several different there's variations of input in Unity. There's like input manager, and they have like a new packaged input manager. I'm not really gonna get into that, but I'll get into like basic input here in code, and we'll just sort of first show what getting input can sort of look like. So I'll create an if statement, and I'll say input dot get button down, and then I can say that I can either provide a string of the button name, or I can say key code. I want it to be exact and say let's just do E. If I press the E button on my keyboard, it will execute whatever is in this. Hold on. Sorry. I hit key down. So button down or key down, both are alternative ways. Like I said, input has a lot of different variations of how you can get input. I like this one because it's not string reference and it's an actual it's E. That. And so what's going to happen is every frame this update will execute and it will check is that the key get pressed down? If so, let's do something. If not, well, just don't. So I'm gonna we'll have it do something. We'll just have it print. Either type print and whatever message you want. You can type debug.log. And I'm sure there's a difference between someone that, but they both do the same thing as far as I'm aware. So I'm gonna do debug.log and I'll say press E. And now I go back here. I hit play. When I press E, notice on the very bottom here, it says press E. And here's this other window I haven't shown you yet, which is the console. And this is where all of our messages, this game sort of appear. So anytime I press E, I get a new message. And this is where that log pretty much logs out to. And if you typed in print, it would also come here as well. This console is also where you would get warnings and errors if there are issues with your code or just how things are set up. So for instance, if I actually come in here and I just did something, save that, and I come back to Unity, it's like, what are you even doing, man? What is this? And so it'll tell you typically what the error is. It thinks I'm just missing a semicolon. It doesn't realize SGDA doesn't actually exist. So it's cool. It tells you, and of course IDE, Visual Studio also tells you with the squiggly lines, the red and stuff like that. But yeah. Any questions so far? Again, at this point, I'm going through some technical stuff pretty quick, but I just want to like show off like different like cool like functions and functionalities of Unity and code really quick. Okay. So let's edit our code just a little bit. I want to describe this. Yeah, okay. I'm going to type this code, and if you don't understand what's going on, I will try to explain it again, but this one's a little bit more. But I at least want to give you this line so that maybe you can have a movable object. I'm going to create a new vector3, and I'm just going to call it control something. Because this is what's going to control how we move. And if you code in like Java, or if you code in C#, then you sort of know how to create like objects. And so this is basically we're creating a new vector3 object called control. We're going to call it vector3 control new vector3. We're creating a new object. And when we do that, we can provide some constraints to it. And so we could tell it that this vector3 is 1, 0, 2. And it can take several different floats. And that's similar to what's happening here with our vector3.forward. And I could actually just replace this with that. And now we should be moving forward X and down our Z. And if I hit play, it's now moving in a diagonal like that. But now if we combine some of our input with this, I could tell it to every frame get an input, and we're going to specifically get an axis. And this one, we are going to, it's going to be a string, and it's going to be called horizontal. And then on our Z, I'm sorry, input dot get axis. We'll do this one, guess what? Vertical, the capital. Make sure you have the appropriate amount of parentheses. And so this line here is basically saying, let's create a new vector3 object, which gets, for our x, we're going to get our input on our horizontal. Our horizontals, for our case, is going to be either A and D or the left and right arrow keys. I believe this also will hook up with like instruction controllers and whatnot as well, or joysticks. And then vertical will be our W and S, or up and down on the arrow keys as well. And if I press D, then it would get like a positive 1. If I press A, it would get like a negative 1. And same with vertical, it would be positive W. What? If I press W, I would get a positive 1. Press S, I get a negative 1. And that's sort of how it's changing the values there. And now if I go back to my scene, and I hit play, it's not moving because I'm not pressing any inputs. And so right now, that vector3 is 0, 0, 0, and it's not doing anything. If I press W, we move. S, so on and so forth. And I can press several at once. I'll go at angles, my arrow keys. Guess what? We have a moving object. We got a player to a degree. It moves. That's pretty nifty. So, with that, you should now already have a scene where you have a player that, you have objects that you can provide actual input and start like actually moving something. And at that point, it's starting to feel a little bit more like it's an interactive media or, a game. Even if it's just, woo, I'll move it around. But hey, start somewhere. And that's pretty nifty. Let's see here. Okay. I got about 20 minutes left. Running a little short in time. I'm trying to see what all do I want to. Okay. I'm gonna move this back. I just want to see area a bit more. I'm gonna move this down. Okay. Let's have it maybe interact with else. So this sphere has a rigid body, and by default, yeah, that's what I thought. This capsule, the sphere will fall, but it'll just go right through it. Even though I have a collider, it moved it there, and the collisions are a little weird. So if you're making actual player, something I want to show y'all real quick as a part of Unity. Unity has a air second. That's what it's called. As a character controller. And this thing already has a bunch of different stuff here. There's a thing called a character controller. And I'm just briefly showing you that it exists. I highly recommend you mess with it. Come in here, look up character controller, and sort of mess around with stuff. But basically, Unity has a built-in controller that help you set up a character, at least a basic one, which is pretty nice. And if we want to actually use, we throw this on here, but it's not doing anything yet. But we're still telling it to move via our transform right now, but we could have it moved via our character controller instead. How we do this is we want to get a reference to this component. So this game object has these different components, as I've mentioned. And when you have a script on this object, you can access this component in that script. Now, by default, you can always just say transform, because every game object has a transform. You can also always say game object and actually get the game object itself, and that has a couple different functionalities as well. But other components, I can't just say character controller. You see it appear there, but I'm getting the class itself, not the actual, not this specific character controller. So how do I get that? Well, I can set up another variable in which this one's actually just going to be a private variable. I don't need to edit this in editor or anything. Private, and I will call it, and it will be a character controller, and then I will call it, I don't know, character. Yeah, that's fine. So now we have a private character controller, and so of this class character controller, which is this component here, but it's not specifically this component yet. Hopefully that didn't confuse anyone. Sorry. To get that, I'm gonna have to say, hey, let's get this specific component, and on start, I want to get this. So I'm gonna say my character variable is equal to. I'm gonna say get component. Got these little chevrons? Is that what they're called? Yeah, I think so. And inside those, you're gonna call that. You're gonna say character controller, and that's just saying what type of class it is. This is saying get on this game object, get a character controller component, and then it's gonna get that and put it into character. My character is now equal to this specific character controller. And now that I have that, I can directly access character and do things with it, and there's all sorts of different functions I can call. Specifically, this character controller has a move, and once you know it, it works pretty much like Translate. So I'm just going to copy what I have in Translate, put it here, and I could delete this line if I want to, but I could also, if I just want to temporarily hold on to that line, if I put 2 slashes in front, it'll comment it out. It doesn't compile that code. It's just there for my viewing. So now, we are now using this character controller to move instead of this translate. And when I play, you probably won't notice much difference. It's still moving pretty similarly. But this character controller has a lot more hooked up to it. Plus, if you see, it will start like interacting with in the environment more. It has some interactions with objects in Unity a bit more. And if you want, you could write all those interactions yourself. You could like create your own character controller, but using this character controller can be good as sort of a starting point in a game jam, and just like to mess with and whatnot. We could even take this character controller, and since we have that, we could add to this vector 3. We could maybe add gravity ourselves, like manually. We'll do 9.8, you know, the gravity constant, in which, yeah, you probably should set up a variable, even just a const variable, but we'll just add gravity. And with the character controller, we have a capsule collider, and we're not gonna move around. And he sort of just moves up like that. I actually thought he would like move around the ball, but yeah. And then, so with a character controller and adding a bit of gravity on it, now seems to like, hey, it's more like an actual moving character. It's moving and stuff like that, and interacts with things. Yeah. So that's. I'm not gonna lie. I have more things lined up, and I would really like I was gonna talk a bit about like trigger colliders and UI and maybe audio. But there's 10 minutes till 9. 12 minutes. I have an exam in the morning, so I don't know if I want to go too long. But I want to take at least these last 10 minutes for any questions, or if there's anything specific you want me to try to show off or explain again, explain further. This is now the time. So, does anyone have anything that they would like to know? Anything I can maybe clarify a bit more on, go into, want to know more about? Like I said, there's a lot more, and there's a lot to do, but I just, yeah. So. Oh no. People left because I started coding. I knew I got technical. Oh no. I wasn't looking at chat.
If we don't get any other questions in, I mean, I think trigger colliders could be a really
Yeah,
good
I
thing
was
to show
about to
off.
say, I think
Yeah.
trigger
Yeah.
colliders would be the best thing to dive into real quick.
Yeah, I will quickly do that.
Yes, the meeting is being recorded.
OBS is going, right? Yes, that would have sucked. Okay. Okay. Yeah, let me really quickly talk about sliders. So actually, we'll take this sphere here to like physically show, and I'm going to remove this rigid body here because we're not gonna use that as we're gonna talk about triggers. And this sphere collider here, I can turn on this trigger, and now it is going to be it's set as a trigger. Well, what's the difference with that? Difference is now this collider doesn't actually physically like collide with things, but it still knows when it is colliding with things. When it's specifically things are triggering it or it's being triggered by. That'll make more sense when I show it here. So I'm going to create another script. I'm just going to do it in here. I'm going to call it pickup. If I can't type, dang it. Simple word. Create a script here. I'll pick up. I do that. It adds a component here. It creates it in the project, typically at the top level. So you probably want to put it where you want, where you can organize it. But for now, we'll go in here. And I mentioned before that there are different like start, update functions and stuff like that. I'm going to get rid of these for now. And there is, for specifically triggers, if you just start typing in trigger, you'll see it pop up here. There's on trigger enter, exit, and there's stay as well. I'm going to select on trigger enter. And it fills in all of this already. And basically, anytime something enters this trigger, it will run whatever's inside these brackets. So, for instance, I can say, I'll just have it print a message to our debug log, and we'll say pickup trigger. Now if I go back to Unity, hit play, go to console, when I go in, it will automatically trigger. And each time we enter, oops, we enter, the player will, or any object will trigger it. And then that will happen. We could get also a little more specific. Let's say we only want the player to trigger this object. Because for instance, just to show, I'm going to call this one pick up. And name your objects. I'm going to duplicate this because I want a sphere. Put it above, a little bit to the right. Call this rock. A rock. And add a rigid body. Doing a couple things real quick here. And it's not a trigger. It's going to collide. And when I hit play, and if you look at the console here, boom, it's a triggered. Once it fell through and it triggered it. And then I can still trigger that collider right there. But what if I only want the player to trigger it? So there's a couple different ways you can do this. But if you notice here, this on trigger enter has a collider other. This other is the collider of what triggered this trigger. So what I can do is I can say if, and then I can check that other collider. A couple of different ways you can go about this, as there is in programming anyways. We go about it different ways. I could say what is the name of it, like other dot game object, and I think that typically you can get the game object, and it's like name, and check that is called a player. I don't typically advise to do that. You can, and it would work. But what if I rename this to player 1? Well, now that's not going to work. Alternatively, you could also look at other and look at its tag, which is what this thing in here is. And you could tag things, and I could tag this player as player, and only player objects be tagged player. And I could say if the other tag is equal to player. And this is better because at least that is more consistent. Yet again, as a string reference, things could change, but it's a little better, and I think that's typically a good way. In this specific instance, I think personally the best way is we know that this player has a player script. We created a specific component for this player, a player. And so we can actually say other, and then if you remember earlier, we used the get component function, and we could say get the player component. And by doing so, this gets a reference to a player component. And if it gets the reference, since it's in this if statement, if there is a reference, then anything inside this if statement will run. If it doesn't find anything, it returns null, and it would then, which the if statement would read as false and not trigger. And so I can now show this. Only objects with that specific script on it. You notice a rock fell, didn't trigger anything. But if I move over, we now have that trigger. And something to note just with triggers, because actually a lot of times with triggers, you will have that, for instance, not have a renderer on it. And it's just a collider. And I can make this like, we'll make this like bigger. And you don't have to have, like, you don't have to physically see it to do anything. And if you notice, if I walk in this area, it still triggers. And so let's say you had a game and like you had a player walk into a room. You could have at the beginning of that room a trigger collider that then tells the game, okay, player walked into this room. Cue the cutscene, or now spawn enemies. And so you can set up all these events in your game based off of these triggers throughout your game. That's probably a good stopping point. But if anyone has any questions, now is the time. Not all at once. Okay. Cool. I hope y'all found this useful. If you've never touched Unity before, hopefully sort of can understand the basics. At the very least, I want to make sure you understood like some of these windows and how to navigate around. And just to get familiar with like just the setup and how like objects are set up in a scene and how they work and stuff like that. As you could probably tell, there is a whole bunch, of course, more with Unity, in which maybe wanted information. Otherwise, I'd be happy just to show off things later. Like if you have questions or anything you want to know more about, you can ask me, and I'll see what information I can provide. And a lot of the other officers are knowledgeable in Unity as well, and probably different ways than I, and it can help you, of course.
Yeah, I think you did a fantastic job. Can we get a round of applause for our guest speaker, please? Come on, give it up. Give it up.
Very good.
Come on. All right, cool.
Appreciate it. Thanks, y'all. Gotta get the last clap.
think it works a little
Uh,
better when we can do it in person and have an actual audience.
yeah.
But, you know, given
That's a little
given
weird.
the circumstances, you did pretty good.
Yeah, no.
Appreciate it. Okay, actually, let me pause the recording then. So, YouTube, have a good day.